here. This is part 2 of the prison-based martial arts. Now, I talked a lot about how the organizations which kind of started the prison-based martial arts movement, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mophia, are all paramilitary, racially organized organizations. Now, you should bear in mind that at the time, from the end of World War II in the 1940s on up through the Civil Rights Movement, following that through the 60s and 70s, socialism and communism have kind of moved into the American landscape. They've kind of hijacked and infected a lot of the Civil Rights Movement. So there's a lot of organizations out there which, while attaching themselves to the very legitimate civil rights movement, also introduced communism and socialism under the guise of progressivism and a few other things. So you have to bear this in mind when you're talking about these organizations, because these organizations exist to indoctrinate people into a form of socialism or a form of communism. And a lot of this falls back on some of the cultist, the martial arts cult way of thinking that I had mentioned before. In fact, these prison-based martial arts are in fact a form of political cult type of indoctrination. Allow me to explain. There's 3 important things to bear in mind here when you're talking about prison-based martial arts. Number 1 is that prison-based martial arts are less about fighting skills, and martial arts are more about indoctrination. This falls back on that cultist mind control processing that I mentioned before, in that one, they attack anyone who disagrees with them. They attack anyone outside of their little clique. They have that inside the cult way of thinking compared to that outside the cult way of thinking. 2, they limit the info to their initiates. This is especially true of the Black Guerrilla Family, the 5 Percenters, and a few other little groups out there, in that anything not coming from an African American is considered inferior or prejudice or what have you. The other thing to bear in mind is that all these groups have their reading list. A lot of it deals with Marxist, Mao, Leninist philosophy, ideas on revolution, such as what you'll see from Che Guevara. And in the case of the Aryan Brotherhood, it involves things such as Sun Tzu's Art of War, right along with Mao's on guerrilla warfare. It also involves the reading of the IRA handbooks, especially the Red Book, the Notes on Guerrilla Warfare. It also involves things like Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Niccolo Machiavelli's Discourses. These reading lists are expected for the initiates to learn, because this takes up their time to keep them away from other information while they're learning what the organization wants them to learn. The other thing is that they establish group identity. You know, if you remember the Black Guerrilla Family, you're also an African or of African descent. And they preach this idea that, you know, they are the disadvantaged children of slaves or grandchildren of slaves who are being held down by the evil white man. Or in the case of the Aryan Brotherhood, you know, they are teaching that they are part of the pure Aryan race and are therefore, you know, the perfect divine race and what have you, similar to Hitler's Third Reich Nazi philosophy. The other thing is that these prison-based martial arts exist to build confidence in the organization based on the military structure and philosophy. Yes, the recruits are taught the philosophy and it's drilled into them, but they're also they use the military rank structure as a way of making the recruits or the soldiers in the organization to feel like they're part of something greater, not just they're in this elitist gang which has a paramilitary organization which basically acts as an army of its own, but you know, they're part of the special African race descended from kings, or the Aryan race descended from the first, you know, the first perfect human beings, or however you want to look at it. They use it as a way of helping to condition and push the idea of the us versus them mentality. The last thing they do is they use the paramilitary rank structure to keep their members in line. as ranking the organization means more training in the prison-based martial arts system. So what this means is the more things you do for the organization, the more things you push the organization, the more things you do to gain status within the organization by growing the organization, and in effect increasing the power of the people who are the heads of the organization, the more rank you get in the organization, which means there's more things that you learn. This is often true of the cult mentality as well. The cult always has something more to teach you, and the longer you stay in there, the longer you stay with it, the more things you learn from the cult. It's the same mentality that flows in. Now, all of this is based on a fundamental technique of indoctrination into an ideology. The more indoctrinated into the ideology you are, the more drawn into the organization you are, and the more things you do for the organization. Now, like I said, you won't learn prison-based martial arts or any of these jailhouse fighting methods just because you go to jail. You won't find them in every gang member or every street gang on the street. You won't find them in every criminal organization. However, you do find them specifically in the more paramilitary organizations. And the reason for this is simple. The more you stay in the organization, the more you do for the organization, the more the organization rewards you with this special knowledge and these martial arts training and these paramilitary training. And it usually works on a set progression. You start off learning basic individual skills, basic fighting techniques, and then you carry on to learning how to apply them with, knives or shanks of some sort. Then you carry them on again by you learning to apply them as a team and moving up through structure and everything else. So that by the time you actually get up there to where you learn something truly dangerous, you're fully indoctrinated into the cult think or the group think of the organization. You've lost all self-identity and you're just, a member of the Black Guerrilla Family or a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. And so when you're looking at the martial arts aspect of this, it's less about martial art, more about indoctrination. Now, the fact of the matter is that most hand-to-hand combat instructors, most police officers don't want to admit that these organizations exist because the problem is for admitting that these organizations exist along these lines and that they teach these prison-based martial arts and these paramilitary skills is to admit that they don't have a upper hand in the situation, that they aren't better at the situation. The fact of the matter is, it's a clear sign of escalation. The more paramilitary the police have become, the more paramilitary the gangs have become. The more paramilitary the gangs become, the more paramilitary the police, of course, have to evolve and become. So it's this continuous cycle of escalation. And the problem with this is that where this leaves you as a civilian is that, well, first of all, the police do not have to protect you. They have no constitutional duty to protect you. I'll include a link to a New York Times article that covers this in the description. They have no duty to protect you, and because they have no duty to protect you, they don't have to get involved when you're dealing with people like this. And God forbid you are in the wrong place at the wrong time to deal with one of these people, but to sit there and poke your head in the sand and say that these people don't exist, these criminals don't exist. And I'm not saying this because I don't want people to train in martial arts. I don't want people to say, well, I can't defend myself, these guys are too well trained. Exactly the opposite. I want you to say, okay, these guys are training, these guys are preparing themselves to do violence on a level that I am not adequate to be able to deal with. So you have to go out and you have to learn, you have to study, you have to think for yourself, you have to learn martial arts, you have to learn self-defense, you have to be able to apply these things. You can say that it is your right to defend yourself. And here's the thing about it, if it's your right to defend yourself, it's also your duty to exercise your right to defend yourself. It's your right to have freedom of speech, so it's your duty to speak up when you feel something is wrong. It's your duty to speak up when you think something isn't right. They're just the same way. It's your duty to, be able to defend yourself, to learn to defend yourself. So, just because these gangs are out here and they're indoctrinated into this thought process and they exist out here along these paramilitary structures, it's not something to say, okay, I can't do anything about it. It's the exact opposite. You need to accept that you can do something about it and try to do something about it.